Good afternoon from the East Coast in the US. My name is Rose Else Mitchell. I'm a teaching fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, as well as an advisor to startups, and I've been building EdTech products for the last 20 years, having begun my career in the classroom. I'm very excited to join today the ASU GSB Summit with a fabulous group of folks to talk about the importance of what works in K-12, where and why, and what's being done across the ecosystem to make sure that kids are getting value from the work that all of you and all of us are doing together. So I'll let our panel introduce themselves and we'll jump in. Anthony.
Hello, and thank you for everything. My name is Anthony Kingston. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Alabaster City Schools in Alabama. We are located 25 miles south of Birmingham, which is in central Alabama. We have 5 schools and 6,200 students.
Lynette.
Hi, I'm Lynette Traury. I'm the Senior Director of Learning Research and Strategy at McGraw-Hill, and my team focuses on learning science, market and efficacy research, as well as online professional learning and academic integrity initiatives.
Malvika.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm Malvika. I work at Al Ventures as the Director of Outcomes and Efficacy, and prior to this, I spent 4 years at Newzala and some time in India working in large-scale assessment design and research and efficacy as well. It's great to be here.
And my colleague on the EdTech Evidence Exchange, Bart Epstein.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bart Epstein. I'm a longtime educator, entrepreneur, investor, and now the leader of the EdTech Evidence Exchange. I'm also a research associate professor at the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development. I was also the founder of an EdTech accelerator and venture fund and spent a decade helping to build and run the world's largest online tutoring service called tutor.com.
Fantastic. So I'm going to begin today with a short anecdote from some of my work around 2010. And I love that this wasn't the case today still, but I think the story is resonant and redolent for what we're talking about. I was working on Read 180, a reading intervention program, and one of the top 10 largest school districts in the country wanted to implement it in 150 schools. You can imagine what kind of sale that is and how significant it is. Every 2 weeks, I would travel to that district and help them with their rollout. After about a month, we had a meeting, and at that meeting, they wanted to know how the data was going. Were the students learning? It was a reading intervention program. We were pulling kids who were behind in reading, who were 14, 15 years old, and trying to bring them forward. But after 1 month, I knew that there were only 29 schools that even had their software up and running. Most of the other schools didn't have enough power sockets and outlets in the classrooms to be able to even do the program, and they were outraged. This story sticks with me because at the time it showed a number of things. First of all, there's real needs that EdTech serves for many, many students in the ecosystem, and very often lowest performing students. When a technology is adopted, it isn't just the technology that needs to be thought about and considered. Thirdly, companies often end up shouldering the responsibility of knowing what's going on where. This district didn't know what was up and running at the time. So the brunt of implementation is often on that side. Ideally, it's a real partnership, but either way, it has an opportunity cost that day one isn't day one. And fourthly, ultimately, it's kids that lose when it doesn't work and when it's not implemented. Round about 32 billion is spent on EdTech globally at K-12. About half of that is the US. A third and a third and a third, more or less, are accounted for digital content, for software, and for hardware. So with all of that out there and all the effervescence around it, where can we point to the positive effects on learning? What do we see in NAEP or PISA that shows that that amount of adoption is really, really actually having a difference? If we look at a CAGR of 18% over the coming years, as is predicted, if not higher, post-COVID, what other metrics or KPIs or information can we use to make sure that the right EdTech solutions are being matched with the right kinds of contexts, and that outcomes beyond just renewals from a company perspective are actually making a difference? So that's what today's really about. How do we make sure it's working and where? So the companies that we're representing today are over 150 that are involved in the exchange, and we hope many more after this. But let's jump in. Lynette, why don't you start us off, Lynette and Anthony, with a story of, well, why you think something like the EdTech Exchange might be relevant in the context that you work. Anthony?
Anthony? Okay.
Ladies first.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rose and Anthony. So if you think about teaching, it's a very individual, personal endeavor. And here at McGraw-Hill, we build instructional tools with a user-centered approach, testing and iterating with teachers going all along the way. And the variability in implementation with the multitude of inputs that we have to consider, that influences the effect of any classroom tool. So despite that, we use that really focused, human-centered and teacher-centered design approach. Implementations look different everywhere. So from our perspective, we try to learn as much as we can from implementation concerns from schools and bring it back to our products. So for an example, a number of years ago, we developed a platform for our products. And it seemed to be, it was working well. It seemed to work best for higher ed and older students. But as we began to develop content for our younger students, we noticed that the interactions and the functioning wasn't working well for those younger students. So we had to take a step back and created a multi-year cross-functional project to investigate and analyze what the K-5 user experience was on our digital platform, what it should be and what it could be. And that led us to a long-term project. It was a year or two, and the findings and outcomes became research-based recommendations for our development team. And they were able to help us reconfigure the platform for those youngest users. And from that, we learned we need to continue to iterate on our research processes so that we can get that deeper understanding of how our programs can be implemented, what happens during implementation, and what we can learn from that.
So Anthony, on the district side, I mean, the kinds of challenges that you have when you're implementing are things you've talked to us about before. I mean, tell us a story about why understanding more about a tool might be helpful from your point of view.
Definitely. In Alabaster, this is my 22nd year in K-12 education, but my 6th in Alabaster. I was with another district for 16 years. And when I first came here 6 years ago, I was touring the schools to find out exactly some of the needs that I knew, but again, you want to get firsthand experience. So going through several schools, I noticed that there was some older technology within the schools, and that's one reason they brought me in to help try to bring us up to speed with the technology resources. Well, I noticed in one school, they had this one set of document cameras that were just prevalent. Lo and behold, one of the major needs they had was laptops to be mobile for a teacher. So I made the recommendation and purchased, basically for all the teachers in our district, brand new laptops. Well, in the end, found out once we got them in that the document camera that was purchased would not work with the new laptops. And again, this was 6 years ago. So after doing some more discovery, we found out that one of the teachers, not really no fault of anybody, but she just bought the technology for the current need, which was an older desktop that she connected to the display that worked for her students, where they weren't compatible with the new stuff. So I kind of call that, you know, what we do in education a lot, we buy for the moment and don't plan for the future. And after that, I went to my superintendent, I asked him and said, here's my proposal. You know, I recommend every purchase for technology must come through me because we have to plan, budget for compatibility, standardization. It has to come through me. So luckily he allowed that to happen. And we were able to do that. I told the teachers, the bookkeepers. And so at this point on now, we try to pilot anything before we use it. And I think through that, get a small group of teachers, work with the vendors on that. And it's been working out well for the last 4 years for us.
Right, and a consultative process to plan what's going to happen, right?
Cool.
Malvika, what about for startups? I mean, Al supports many K-12 startups in their portfolio. why do you think implementation so relevant, and the context of that implementation for your companies?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think irrespective of whether you're an EdTech company or an educator, an admin, and like the stories that we've heard here today, I think we all have those anecdotes of sort of failed implementation because of lack of resources, lack of consideration for context. And part of the problem in my mind is thinking of EdTech as vendors. Somehow I hear the word vendors and sort of cringe a little bit, because in my mind, it's a little bit of that very transactional, very low quality expectation of service. Like it's like it's the buyer's responsibility once they have the product to figure out what's going to happen. And close to the point you made, I think it just needs to be a much stronger partnership where EdTech can no longer be vendors. They're part of the conversation. They need to be partners, and they need to have equal responsibility for the support, the professional learning, for the context that's happening in classrooms, and figure out if their solutions are going to work with kids at the center. And I think that's one of the reasons that this whole process is really important for startups, is to understand the kinds of situations in which their products are and are not going to work, and what that context really is. And I think that EdTech Genome Project is doing a great job of that, because I think it's creating the foundation of trust and creating a sort of a framework to allow people to have that conversation with equal information on both sides, which is why I'm optimistic about this project quite a bit. And I think that's why we need something like this, and startups should rely on something like this as well.
Right. I really like that, equal information on both sides, right?
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I agree with the partnership part. We also, 3 years ago, we did a demonstration with smart panels, interactive panels. And we had 4 different vendors come in and basically did a pilot for our elementary and high school teachers. So we worked with them to do the partnership, and they basically were trying to sell their devices to us. So right there, the key, if any startup, any business whatsoever out there can work with us in a partnership, that's going to be benefit for us in K-12 education.
So Bart, as you're as CEO and founder of the EdTech Evidence Exchange, which is a cross-sector initiative to improve the insights and quality of what works where, particularly on the implementation side. I mean, what did you hope as you were working with funders? What was the promise of this endeavor?
It's a great question, Rose. The reason that we launched the EdTech Evidence Exchange is to meet a collective need. Back in 2016 and 2017, several hundred of us spent nearly a year in cross-functional working groups doing research and investigating how often is evidence and evidence of efficacy used to make decisions about what people buy and how they implement them. And the answer is not much. And when we drill down to understand why, the core problem is a lack of information. We have an extremely fragmented education system. And it's one thing to expect each school district, of which we have almost 14,000 in the country, to be responsible for local hiring and buying food and operating school buses. But it's something entirely different to expect them to each be able to make independent judgments about which of more than 7,000 EdTech products is a good fit for their environment. And what happens right now is that in almost every district, well-intentioned people are reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. There's no good sources of information about what their peers are experiencing. And so they ask some colleagues, but they mostly do a pilot and some webinars, and they try something. And then after 6 months, nobody has the incentive, the time, the shared language, or the platform to document their work. And so this is what economists call a collective action problem, when everyone would benefit from something happening, but it doesn't make sense for any individual actor to do the work. It would be like if there was no city government and there were no public snowplows, it wouldn't make sense for any of us as individuals to go out and plow the streets. So we concluded collectively at the symposium that this problem was sufficiently large and academic that we needed somebody to take it on and lead the work of building industry consensus about how to measure implementation environments, how to define variables that until now have been the realm of anecdote and spin. And we were fortunate that Strata Education Network and the University of Virginia and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and now Carnegie Corporation of New York have all seen the need for this work and chosen to support it. Over time, as we build our platform and we seek to collect data from hundreds of thousands of educators, we're going to need to find more funders, because a core principle of our work is we pay cash stipends to educators to get them to document their environments and their experiences so we can all learn from each other.
So this is very different from an IES or the What Works Clearinghouse, which sometimes has been called the What Doesn't Work Clearinghouse, because the barriers for what goes in there and what kind of is measurable are so hard. And part of the reason they're so hard is actually because of the implementation challenges or the contextual differences that we see. So this is not that, right?
That's right. This is not about efficacy or evaluating products. Right. Your product is the same when you implement it in 100 different schools. So it can't be you that is the reason that the product thrives in this location and it struggles in that location. Question is, how can we all learn from these implementations so that schools can make better decisions about A, what's likely to be the best fit for them, and B, how we learn from their peers. Instead of reading two-sentence reviews from 1,000 random people you know nothing about, we're collecting large-scale feedback and contextual data from educators so that when you go into our platform, you'll be able to say, I want to understand the experience of districts like mine when it comes to Title I teacher agency, or schools like mine. Yes.
A lot of variability school to school.
That's right, on all these different variables, so that you don't inadvertently purchase a product that is way over your head. Your school is not ready for it. You don't have the technical infrastructure. You don't have sufficient buy-in from your teachers for something powerful and complex. So you can make a better decision. And if you conclude that you're not ready for it, hopefully our work will lead to many schools and districts embarking on change management to get themselves ready for the tools that they aspire to use.
Right. Thank you. And I mean, change management is one of those terms that comes out of the business community, but is super relevant here. I like to think of this as instructional change management, because we're not just changing technology, devices, or computers. We're also asking, as we so know right now, we're asking educators to change their practice and to adapt to new tools and contexts. So let's talk about what those variables are, because that's really been, the bulk of the work over, or half of it. We'll talk about the measurement instruments as well. So I'm going to share the variables that we look at on the EdTech Genome Project, and that's really obviously the basis of this conversation. So, we call this what makes or breaks an EdTech implementation. So just take a little look, those of you joining us today, at these, and it may be that some of these really resonate with you. We had some interesting debates from industry about the role of communication or change management. And we believe that actually both of those are actually embedded within these variables. So these are the things that are different from place to place that will affect, have a high effect on both implementation and outcomes. I think with COVID, we've seen that infrastructure and operations, which of course includes devices and broadband access, is pretty foundational. Right now, we haven't emphasized one or more of these over the other. And of course, it's about the interaction amongst them. But we'd love to hear from you listening as to, we assume you're out there, we can't see you, as to what is most relevant for of those contextual variables, most affect the success or failure of your products and services. That's from a company point of view. And then from a context in a school district, or if you're a CTO like Anthony, which of these do you think of as being the most important variables for success or failure? So we're opening a poll. If we can go ahead and do that, Joanna, that'd be great. And again, we want to have a discussion about which of these, a vision for teaching and learning, which really comes from the superintendent, infrastructure and operations. What about selection processes and competing priorities, Bart? Say a little about that.
Sure. So the selection process, we think of each of these on a spectrum. On the worst end of the spectrum, the selection process is somebody with purchasing authority goes to a conference, has a couple of drinks with someone, is impressed, and comes and makes a purchase without any investigation, any evaluation of potential fit, any of the needs of the educators. And on the far end of the selection process is one that's very complex and rigorous and thoughtful. That starts with an adoption process. That's right. And but you can't have an adoption process that is broadly inclusive for everything. And different schools have different resources. And by the way, for different products, whether you have a robust selection process may matter more or less, depending on its complexity. Competing priorities, number 4 on the list, is what I would call initiative fatigue. How many things do you have going on in your school or your district? Do your teachers and administrators have bandwidth to implement something? We see lots of cases where a wonderful product struggles to be implemented, and we learn later that it's because the school also changed the learning management system at the same time, and the parent-student communication system. And the teachers were told that those things were absolute priorities, and they used up all of their bandwidth trying to do that.
Or
each one of these.
One I heard about was, sorry to cut you off there, but one I remember sharing with you was about a district where they'd bought a math product and it was the core curriculum. Then they bought 2 supplemental math products and then a math intervention product. So the competing priorities might even be within a domain. And understanding that context from a company point of view, like what are you fitting in with and what's given priority? So I'm hoping we've got some feedback on some of these things, just running through the others. Quickly, implementation systems and processes. This is the one that in the large district I was in, we were really trying to get going, which is, do you have an implementation plan for all the stakeholders? Is there strategic leadership support? So that's not just about the vision, but actually putting it in place. Staff culture, teacher agency and teacher beliefs and knowledge. Bart, do you want to say something about those?
Sure. It really matters whether teachers feel a sense of being listened to and valued and respected. And the more complicated and powerful a product is, the more correlation there seems to be with the successive implementations when the teachers feel as though they helped select it, as opposed to one day they just get told, we're switching to this. I once sold a 6-figure deal to a superintendent in Texas at a conference, and 6 months later, it was never implemented. And I eventually talked to the person who was responsible for implementing, and she said, that beep doesn't listen to me, he doesn't respect me, he can buy anything he wants, but he can't make me implement it. And that was pretty stark.
That's the last mile, really, isn't it?
It is. And for each of these variables, our EdTech Genome Steering Committee has done a deep dive supported by research to create definitions that have multiple components. And I think we'll get to that a little later, and we're building new measurement instruments. But hopefully people who are listening are getting at least a few of these, and they're nodding their heads, and they're thinking of times when one of these or more of these issues tripped up an implementation, and think about in the future how wonderful it would be to know this going into a school. If this data were available to you so that when you went into a school, you could know that they have wonderful infrastructure and operations, they have robust teacher agency, but they have very poor professional learning. And that helps you as the partner who's providing the solution to adjust your side of the equation, perhaps to provide more support and more hands-on training.
So Anthony, what do you think as you think about the context that you're working in? You know, what jumps out as being something that's working really well? It sounds like, you know, there's a certainly strategic leadership support from the superintendent and you as the leader. But anything else that you think you'd give a 10 or a 9 or 10 to?
All of them. No, for me, you know, being 22 years in K-12 education, I've learned the hard lessons. I've made the pitfalls and the stumbles, and I've hopefully learned from a lot of them. And, you know, to me, it starts top down. When you have a visionary or a superintendent that's willing to put forth the resources, the time, and the guidance to lead, it starts there. Then it goes to the school administrators, because you can have a superintendent that's all gung-ho, but then you got to get those building level managers, those supervisors to get on board as well. And fortunately, in our 5 schools, we have those, part of those. One thing I've learned, and when I first got here, I created technology committees. We have a technology committee of teacher leaders in every school. So we listen to them, we meet and get their input, because again, they're the front lines. And anything that I've done now in my last 15 years is about what can help your job easier, what can help you more efficient in teaching our students. That's what I'm here to support you all, teaching and learning. It's not about the technology. It's about how I can make your life easier. So again, all those things are very critical components, and I'll talk more about professional learning here. But like I said, just getting that input, building that infrastructure, and I know every district doesn't have it. I was a one-man shop in my previous district, and like I said, I'm blessed to have 6 people working for me now in my department here. So I understand being a lone ranger and having to basically recruit people to assist, and then being fortunate enough to be able to segment and specialize my staff. So it's all critical. But leadership from top down starts it for me.
Yeah, and there's a number of those, obviously. 1 and 6 very much speak to, and 7, culture, obviously, to what leadership can bring. And then we see in some of these others, particularly 8 and 9, what is the role of teacher agency and teacher action? And how do those correlate? If I asked a teacher in a district how they think about teacher agency, is that going to be the same as how Anthony might ask it, right? You know, agency has to be felt by the people who are supposed to be the agents, right? So interestingly, you know, one of the things I think is interesting when we ask about what's the most important here, you know, implementation is all of these things working together. So actually a balanced scorecard is good, and that's more or less what we have. We have 13% for teacher agency, teacher belief, strategic leadership at 9%, infrastructure also at 13%, it's the magic 13 number, but implementation systems and processes, which we've had these arguments, could encompass all of these things, that's 17%. But that's what we'd expect. We don't expect that all of you would say, yes, number 5, it's 50%, that's the most important, because we all know that how you're doing on these contextually, and frankly, how a partner or a company is supporting these is relevant. So let's step out of looking at that, and thanks everyone for participating in the poll. So Malvika, tell us a little bit about you working on the working groups that met around these 10 variables, and we had industry representatives, we have nonprofit sector, you've heard already from Bart, everyone around our philanthropy partners, and then we had obviously a whole bunch of fabulous proper wonky psychometricians also on those working groups. So tell us a little bit about what happened and what the goal was around the measurement instruments.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I couldn't I'll echo the diversity in the group that there was. It truly was a mixed set of perspectives. I mean, usually I find myself in rooms where I'm with other EdTech companies or with other investors where it's a little bit of an echo chamber, we're kind of saying the same things. And I think this was a good refresher from that, where I truly was hearing other perspectives from nonprofits, from higher ed institutions, from educators. So I think it allowed a forum for very healthy debate. I think what ended up happening consistently through that process as we were designing the instruments or thinking about what the right variables or context should be for some of these implementation processes, there was just a lot of healthy back and forth and questioning of what we truly understood. And to give you a more concrete example of that, one of the things that we had to do was design this instrument. And we kept asking ourselves, who is going to answer this survey that we're designing? Is it the teacher? Is it the principal? Is it the literacy coach? Is it the admin? Because we realized very quickly that depending on who's going to answer it, our questions need to be very different, and the responses that we'll expect might be very different. And I think that ties back to this idea of alignment and buy-in that we were talking about, that it's so important, irrespective of what the answers on those surveys were, it's really important that the answer on the teacher side and the admin side are aligned and they're the same. Because if there's a disconnect there, we failed the implementation process even before we've started. Because to the points that we've all heard, it's just not going to work. And the other thing that I think that stood out to us was this idea of feedback loops and how crucial that is in implementation processes as well. I think we all think of any given plan. Think of this year, for instance. I mean, all school districts and all EdTech companies probably had a conversation when they bought EdTech of this is what we're going to do. This is the number of devices we have. This is how this year is going to happen. And then COVID-19 hit. And all those realities changed overnight, and people were forced to make very hard decisions about EdTech implementation and delivering good content. And in that reality, it's so important to think of that feedback loop process that we were obsessed with as an idea, which is you have to now in this moment evaluate what the current realities are and whether the implementation is going to work in this reality, or do we need to pivot? It's unfair to both the EdTech company and the educator to hold them
And
to the standard. And the kids is a whole yes, all of them, that to hold them to the standards that were set at the beginning of the year, knowing the reality. So I think those are just examples of conversations that we had in that room. I could probably give you a lot more examples, but yeah, it was just constantly thinking about what's good context, what's bad context, and what would work well to ultimately serve kids and serve learners better.
So there are these instruments, right? And there's like a couple of questions, or say for each of those 10 variables we looked at, that a school in Anthony's district can take. And, it's unlikely, Anthony, that actually all 10 are 10 out of 10, right? So why would a school be interested in taking an instrument like that, and how would it help them in their forward movement towards document cameras? Or I know you've had to bring in a whole lot of new things as part of your pivot to hybrid and remote. So tell us a little bit about why your district or a school in your district would want to spend time doing a measurement like that.
Well, for reason, time and money. For us, there's limited amounts for everybody and for all of us. So with professional learning is what I'm going to discuss, is that in regards that we want to make sure the teachers have that input, that we include them, because they're the front lines. They're the ones going to be using it for the students. So again, we always start with a pilot, a trial basis, or pilot group of teachers to use the software or the tech resource to get their input. And then using some of the measurements, as Bart mentioned, in education, unfortunately, we've all bought the stuff. We've thought this quick silver bullet, this is going to fix it all for us. And like I said, it was just waste. It wasn't used, it wasn't implemented properly. So we train, we follow up, and then we support our teachers here in Alabaster. So that's the professional learning, and that's the key for us, to make sure they have buy-in. We follow up, we train, and then we take diagnostics and data to see how beneficial that product was for us.
Right, and you said, I think when we chatted about this, you said that what you were doing, if you were measuring professional learning at the school level, it might give one piece of information, but if you're measuring it at kind of the level of school, I think you mentioned that like the elementary teachers had really good professional learning, but the high school teachers didn't, or maybe it was the other way around yes. One of their EdTech solutions.
Correct. With the implementation of our recording lessons for this time we were out this spring, the high school teachers did well. They were using it, recording lessons, posting to their websites. But unfortunately, the elementary teachers just didn't get exposed as much. We had to buy the resources for one thing. We didn't have those document cameras that were needed to do the recording, the online recording. So once we got that resource, and then we trained them this summer, we did over 100 hours from 10 days, over 100 hours of training for our teachers to equip them to build digital lessons for our teachers and for our students' remote use. So again, the high schools were able to do it, but we just had to work with our elementary teachers, K through 8, on implementing that technology and recording things online for access.
Right. Yeah. So that measurement would definitely look different in different parts of your district, and that's what we'd expect. But are you, Lynette? What? Just from a back to you, Bart. But Lynette, from a big company perspective, how do you think an instrument like that would why would industry care about it? Why would a big company care about this?
Well, the great reason is because the work and the data that we would get from it, the contextual data, implementation data, teacher perception data, in addition to student outcome data. The industry cares because data has so much potential, and all of us as companies struggle to gather data, analyze it, and make meaning of it, and use it in our production and our revamping. So we're at the service of our customers. We need to understand what's working and what things they need and need to be able to do. So a more unbiased perspective, like what the Genome Project variables can provide and the measurement instruments can provide, have great potential to provide insights to us that will help shape where we can invest and what we should invest in. So as an example, if you think about the online professional learning assets and modules, we have those for all of our products. And the professional learning instrument that we have for the EdTech Genome, it's focused on practices that support effective integration of technology so you can improve student outcomes and learning. And so from our perspective, using that criteria and from the variable helps us evaluate our professional learning assets that we're creating, and that we're able to have more confidence in knowing that the PL assets we're creating, professional learning assets we're creating, fit what the schools need and what teachers need and what districts need. So imagine we're able to target our professional learning and base it on teaching style or instructional goal or learning assets. They can help us go down that avenue very, very quickly.
Or a little or a lot, right? I mean, if a district says that they don't have much professional learning in this area, that might be an opportunity to extend what you have. Whereas another district says we have coaches, we have this, they need a different kind of tool. So they're sort of scoring higher on the instrument. So I think it's particularly relevant when you think about a big company that has products that are often accused of being sort of one size fits all. They may actually have more personalization, but they also need to be customized to the environment. And that's exactly what we're talking about, how different the environments are. So
can I add one more thing before? Because what you just said reminded me of another reason why these variables, having these instruments would be really useful for companies. For example, we just created a brand new product called Rise, and it just came out, and we created it over a really short period of time. And it is an adaptive supplemental math and ELA program, but it's new. So having something like these variables to measure how that new product is working in the market right away would provide us with so much information to be able to gauge what characteristics allowed it to be successful, what characteristics of the districts, was it maybe not so successful, and what can we do to revamp it, and what direction can we take? So having that kind of information early on in an implementation is really beneficial, not only for the school, but for the product makers, or not vendors, but the product developers, so that we can really create the products that our customers need.
So Malvika, what about startups? You mentioned earlier why you think startups should be part of this and be listening. But why would they care about it when they've just got to grow and get this problem to the solution they have to this problem out to everybody?
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little bit biased in the conversation because the role I hold is at a VC firm, and it's a pretty unique role. I mean, I spend majority of my time helping portfolio companies think about outcomes and efficacy. And the reason for that is I think we as a firm, and I personally truly believe that the only way to succeed and create long-lasting businesses is by creating impact. But the reason I think the industry needs to care about this, beyond that, a startup should care, is it's very much like a broomstick challenge. As a theater kid, you were always given, like, as a warm-up exercise, a broomstick, and you had to imagine like 30 different ways that you could use it in 1 minute. And I think that's what educators do every single day with EdTech products. And the only time you realize that is when you get into a classroom. They take your product and use it in so many different ways, from 101 to 2-to-1 to like all inclusive. And I think just being aware of all those realities and catering to those needs, and to what Lynette said, designing your PD to match that, is so important. And also just knowing when to walk away. I think that's so important as well. Like, yes, it works, but this is when it doesn't work, because every time there's a mismatched year of implementation, it's a year of a child's education. And that's a lot at stake. And I don't think we can afford that anymore. So I think those are some of the reasons that everybody just needs to care about this.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, with the 13 or $14 billion spent, yeah, there's a lot of lost opportunity. There's an opportunity cost, but ultimately there's kids who are not benefiting through, the complexities here. So I just want to thank all of the representatives. We've consulted with, I think overall something like about 100 plus nonprofit organizations and funders, and over 120 companies from very big to very small. I just want to thank particularly the Industry Council that Malvika and Lynette are part of, as well as representatives from Imagine Learning, Renaissance, Teaching Strategies, Khan Academy, Edmentum, ABC Mouse, Bright Bites, Elevation, Edmentum, I think I said you twice, Clever, Lexia, Newsella. So, and we've many more, and a whole lot of excellent data that we've collected. So very grateful for industry folks brought in already and understanding this. And for more information, this is ongoing work. We're going to have a framework that will have public review, including educators, researchers, and industry in December, right, Bart?
It'll be early next year, probably
Early
at
next
least
year.
mid-February.
Excellent. And we look forward to getting that message out to you all. Please contact either Bart or myself if you'd like to be part of making sure you're on a list to be consulted on it. And the EdTech Evidence .org is the place to go find more information. I want to thank each of you, Anthony, Bart, Lynette, and Malvika, for a great session and for being so passionate about this incredible work. I go back to that story about no power, and I know that we have to actually bring all of the resources to help the industry and our schools do the best work with all this fabulous ed tech. So be well, be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rose.